about giving the green light for the fund to look at the Ghanaian situation.
And tonight, Ghana faces danger of losing its lifeline mineral resources, including cocoa, bauxite, and oil, to the People's Republic of China. President Akufo-Addo says he's confident a bailout from the International Monetary Fund with China on board will help the country restructure this controversial debt arrangement, which has got many Ghanaians worried.
If implemented as planned, this program will really help us not only dealing with the crisis, but get out of the crisis and really lay the foundation, which is exactly what you're talking about.
We have details as the resident IMF representative warns Ghana's current economic crisis will only be resolved if government is able to stick to the reforms and conditions spelt out in this $3 billion support program. And top story, as always, is brought to you by Vodafone. Further together, I'm blessed Sogah. And tonight, President Akufo-Addo has forcefully jumped to the defense of the role of China played in Ghana securing the International Monetary Fund deal amidst reports the global power may have the reason for the delay, may have been the reason for the delay in accessing this $3 billion support program. This comes on the heels of a revelation by the International Monetary Fund that 4 collateralized loans from China exposed the country to losing part of its mineral resource revenue in addition to electricity sales should there be a default in this debt arrangement. The approval of Ghana's $3 billion bailout package from the International Monetary Fund was predominantly contingent on China's participation in the external debt restructuring talks. My colleague Isaac Kofiaje has been studying this report and will be joining me in studio for a chat on the implications of this loans. But first, take a listen to President Akufo-Addo.
China is the biggest bilateral creditor to Ghana. What were discussions like with them? I mean, did they contribute to part of the delay?
Yes, no. I think that China took a very positive, proactive role. They co-chaired the official creditor committee. It was the final hurdle that we had to overcome before being able to go to the fund. It was when the creditor committee met, I believe, they co-chaired it with Paris, and I believe they met on the 11th of May, and China was extremely positive about giving the green light for the fund to look at the Ghanaian situation positively. Though I don't have any hesitations, any criticisms about the Chinese involvement in the Chinese involvement in the Ghanaian economy. By and large, has been very, very helpful. I know that it's a matter of controversy in the West about China. But for us, they have been strong friends, and in the time of this difficulty, they proved to be strong friends. So
do you think the controversy has been overplayed then?
We're talking about competition amongst big powers for influence and for the controversy will be generated out of that fact alone. The competition is bound to stimulate a lot of controversy. So there it is. I don't think it's of particular value to go. It's a fact that we have to deal with. Well, we deal with it on the principle that our economy, our politics, our country has historically been one that has been outward looking, that has insisted on as much as possible friendship with all those who want to be friendly with Ghana. There's certain principles that have been important to us, but beyond that, we have attempted to be friendly with all countries. China is.
And that's the position of President Akufo-Addo in all of this. The nation itself, as we speak, has received at least $600 million, with government indicating that it will be using the money to shore up the Bank of Ghana's reserves and budgetary support. There are, however, concerns about whether the program will take Ghana out of the current economic challenges. Resident Representative Dr. Leandro Medina is confident an effective implementation can achieve this. We'll get to that sound for you shortly, but my colleague Isaac Kofi J is joining me in studio with, of course, a lot to unpack about this whole loan arrangement with China. Kofi, let's get to it. What does the report say about, first of all, this collateralized loan as of 2022 and the associated implications should we default?
So, Blazer, let me take you to page 52 of the IMF program. It says Ghana's collateralized debt is entirely held by China. This is as a result of 4 loans agreements we signed in 2007 to 2018 that amounted to $619 million to finance infrastructure projects. These are collateralized against commodity production, and they listed these commodities: cocoa, bauxite, and oil, and even electricity sales. Now let's go to page 44 of the same document, and this is what the IMF says about collateralized loans.
Yes.
So according to the IMF, a debt is collateralized when the creditor has the rights over an asset or revenue stream that will allow it, if the borrower defaults on its payment obligation, to rely on the asset or revenue stream to secure repayment of the debt.
And Kofi, I believe the IMF is adding this to provide context.
Absolutely.
To the point about default. There's also some more revelation about Ghana owing 4 countries some $3.2 billion. Give us the details there.
So these 4 countries, let's categorize them. First, we look at the Paris Club countries. The IMF listed 2 countries. First one is Belgium. We owe Belgium $437 million. United Kingdom, UK, $430 million. Now let's look at the non-Paris clubs. There's China, $1.9 billion, and India, 475. So if you add all of them, it's over $3.2 billion.
And what has been the precedence for countries that have defaulted, their loans to China? Because that's becoming a worry for many Ghanaians out there.
Yeah, there are templates all around. So we can look at Sri Lanka, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Uganda. All these countries use their assets as collaterals when they sign loan agreements with China. And when they defaulted, the clause was triggered.
And indeed, it's the reason for which many Ghanaians out there are worried and even skeptical about the ability of the IMF program itself to resuscitate Ghana's economy. We can take a listen to the resident rep for the IMF, Dr. Leandro Medina, who is confident that an effective implementation of the policy can achieve this.
This program is very strong on really the objectives and the policies and reforms that are needed. So again, if implemented as planned, this program will really help us not only dealing with the crisis, but get out of the crisis and really lay the foundation, which is exactly what you're talking about, right? Doing the transformation, so then you can have a more sustainable and long-lasting inclusive growth. Ensuring social protection is a key aspect of the program. Let me be clear. In times of crisis, it's not uncommon that the expenditure as a whole is reviewed, and the different initiatives are being reviewed to make them more cost efficient. So this is what it's going into that.
How that donor is going to come on board to support?
The extended credit facility, as I mentioned, is a program to support, financially support the needs of countries in difficulty. And one very important dimension of this type of program is the role as the catalytic role in securing foreign aid and foreign financing. In this sense, the role of donors, of development partners and other multilaterals is very key, and we really expect them to come on board, and there are some of them that are already working on the different initiatives that they have.
The external creditors negotiations and all the rest. Some are saying that it remains very critical to the success of this program and even passing some of the program reviews.
As I said before, this is a comprehensive debt operation that includes different types of creditors, right? It includes the domestic debt, it includes the external bilateral, and it includes the external commercial. What I can say, the domestic front has been largely concluded. The external front, which is, I think, what you referred to, it has two components, right? The bilateral and the commercial. On the bilateral front, we have received assurances in the context of the G20 Common Framework, right? The Official Creditor Committee was formed and co-chaired by China and France have provided the assurances. So that is very promising. On the commercial front, the authorities are discussing with their creditors, and also progress is being made, and we expect also,
and that's the position of the resident rep for the IMF, Dr. Leandro Medina, speaking to my colleague George Wefe. Of course, a lot more in that interview for you later on the Joy News channel on PM Express. But it's time now to bring in coordinator of the Third World Network, Dr. Yao Graham, and also the director for the Center for Asian Studies, Dr. Lloyd Ama, who are all joining us in this conversation. I thank you, gentlemen, for your time here on Top Story. Dr. Graham, the problem that many third world countries have been facing, the issue about the Chinese debt trap, as the Western world would term this, but it's becoming a reality in our case. How should we be treading cautiously in this trying times?
Well, first of all, we need to define what exactly we are calling the Chinese debt trap, because it's a term that we can throw around very easily. So when you say the Chinese debt trap, what precisely are we talking about?
But then you find a situation where our lifeline mineral resources, for instance, cocoa, bauxite, oil, all being collateralized out of this arrangement that we're having. If the debt restructuring does not go at the creditor committee level, because we're not setting right now what China will commit to, that will mean that all of these resources will be gone.
No, I think that's a completely alarmist and misrepresentation of reality. I've read the way in which the excerpt in the IMF document has been lifted, and elaborated. First of all, let's agree that China is the single biggest bilateral creditor. So China is an important creditor. So its commitment to the bilateral group to negotiate with Ghana, I think, is an important development. However, the issue of what would happen or not happen to our debt, the largest group of creditors with whom we have not even begun to have any conversation yet are the private international creditors, who also, even if things are not collateralized, have a claim if we default. There was an incident some years ago when a vulture fund, which had bought Argentinian debt on the open market and seized an Argentinian boat from Tema Harbor. It wasn't collateralized, but they had a judgment that they came and enforced. So the thing about things being seized, there are steps to it. But I think that the thing about collateralizing, before you even get to assets being seized, there are so many sources from which the Ghana government can take steps to pay debts which are owed. So I think in discussing these things for the public, we should also take some responsibility to do some education.
And that's exactly what we've done.
Which arise from owing through the steps to the steps. So to jump to this conclusion, because all the creditors could seize Ghanaian assets.
Yes, and
time came.
And that's why we're raising the possibility of China doing that. In fact, the IMF document points to that. I just want my colleague Isaac Ofiaji to read out. If you would indulge me, Doc. Let's read out what the document says about this particular situation in which we find ourselves.
The loans we are talking about are not collateralized against assets. They are collateralized against commodity production, revenue streams, cocoa, bauxite, oil, and even sales from electricity.
Yes, and that's what the document is telling us.
But the income stream source of revenue, which they want to guarantee that will be paid. So when you move from there to say they will seize the assets, we are misrepresenting the terms of the thing.
We've never said the assets will be seized, but if you do have a collateral, the IMF document is possibly pointing out to
IMF,
what may happen.
I think it's about revenue stream. Yes. So what is the problem that we are talking about here? I just want to understand the problem.
Dr. Lloyd Amo is also joining us. He's the director for the Center for Asian Studies. Doc, you've been listening to Dr. Al Graham as well. Touch on this point about China not necessarily having the ability as of now to seize or perhaps take over these assets. But from your perspective, looking at what we have said and what the IMF is raising about committing these resources in a form of a debt arrangement, that could be detrimental to the country, you agree?
Of course, I get the angles that Dr. Graham is presenting in terms of the nitty-gritty, the legal questions, how it is that if China decides on our default to take control of these collateralized assets you are talking about, that there will be steps. But beyond the finesse of all of that, and of course the serpentine reality, the fact remains, to be brutally frank, that when we play, these resources would be taken control over by the Chinese. In fact, the data that I have, from very, very credible sources in terms of similar realities with other countries. In fact, the issue of Laos has come up very recently regarding the dangers in terms of their engagement with China. They are building this interesting road under the BRI, and the analysis shows the danger in there in case that the processes do not go through in terms of what is envisioned for the project, the loans that have been taken. Obviously, Laos is going to face problems. We've seen this with Sri Lanka, the port, and all of that. We've seen that with the Zambian case, So when we cut to the case, we face an obvious potential of losing these resources. Of course, in the discourse, it's important to more or less provide a nuanced view of how this will come about beyond an alarmist kind of presentation of the reality. But the truth remains that we owe, and we are trying to deal with this debt on our necks. And the Chinese angle, because of all the loans that we took between 2007 and 2018 to finance infrastructure projects, and the ways in which these loans were more or less fashioned out. There's a sense in which, given the pressure of the debt we face and all of that, that if we don't hold our side of the bargain, then we face the real possibility of China calling in this collateral. So I will be blunt with the fact. And say it as it is.
And in fact, here at Joy News, what we've been attempting to do is to take it by a cursory analysis, looking at what's been happening to each loan that we've contracted. And Isaac Kofiaje is with us. The repository tells us the picture, how stark it is in terms of what we've done and what we've committed. Let's get to some examples then, and let's put that to the gentleman we have on the telephone.
So let's start from 2007, when we took 306 million from China to build the Bui Power hydropower project, a 400 megawatts power project. We used cocoa exports as the collateral. And then in 2012, when we took, let's go to 2009, for instance, there was a technical cooperation, and then also in 2012 as well, we took 75 million from China for the same Bui Power project. We used cocoa as collateral. In 2012, again, Bui Power 76, cocoa was used as collateral. And then also in 2013, we took 850 million from China to do Western Corridor gas infrastructure projects. oil exports were used as collateral. 2013 again, we took 115 million US dollars for integrated national security communication. Oil exports was used as collateral. And in 2019, very recent, we took 186 million US dollars for the construction of 11 coastal fishing landing sites. Oil revenue again as security. And also the last one in 2019, where we used bauxite as collateral.
And so, Dr. Yao Graham, you see the trend of how we've been dealing with China over the years.
Actually, the point I was going to make a secondary point, that the flow, the kind of what you call a resource for infrastructure has been a feature of Chinese lending. That's a fact. What I was actually coming to is that in the framework of where we are now, I think it's progress that the Chinese have submitted to being part of a group of creditors. And I think we need to pay some attention to this. Because part of the reason why the Chinese thing has tended to be an outlier is that there's no multilateral debt resolution mechanism. And the Paris Club historically was a group of Western countries. So with China now having become a big lender to developing countries, it is quite significant that they've agreed to be part of this, submitted to a framework where they have to be like others in going forward. But coming back home, I think the lesson to take from this, okay, is our own governance. The list that you have read, how could any responsible government pile up commitments to securitize borrowing for security infrastructure with our export earnings? A dam, it's a productive asset, which you can argue that will generate a revenue stream and so on. So in discussing the threat or otherwise arising from collateralization, I think the more important lesson we should be discussing as Ghanaians is the absolute lack of accountability for the terms that our governments borrow on, the uses which they put the money, the results that they do not show, and the complicities of our parliaments in allowing these things to happen. So in this moment when citizens' savings have been seized by the government, because the treatment of citizen creditors to the government is completely discriminatory compared to his readiness to negotiate with foreign creditors. Pensioners are marching up and down because their assets, their savings have been seized. I think the responsibility for this situation we should discuss in terms of the domestic accountability, which the consequence of which we are focusing on.
Indeed.
So rather than focusing on the consequence, I think we should be learning lessons, because I was speaking to your person earlier, I said every major power in this world is doing a deal with China. The Russians are discussing a new pipeline. I'm sure they will take care of their interests. The Europeans buy 99% of their solar power investment equipment from the Chinese. They are taking steps to protect themselves. So when we come here and talk about the threat China poses to us, we should be asking who in this country put the country's head in the mouth of the Chinese dragon, and discuss future lessons to avoid a repetition of the impunity, the abuse of power, the corruption, and the waste and the lack of accountability which is responsible for this.
And this is an exercise that you in academia will continue to do. Let me give the final words to the director at the Center for Asian Studies, Dr. Lloyd Amma, the way forward and how we could possibly avert this. For now, we've not been able to get an exact commitment from the Chinese government. Would you want our government to bring to bear diplomacy, engage China some more, so we're certain that these loans would not set upon us?
Well, for sure. The news that came out indicated that the Chinese obviously were interested in talking. They had joined the committee, but we still do not have the details in terms of what the Chinese are bringing to the table. And so we need to be clear about that. But obviously, there are broader questions regarding the way we've been running our polity, the way in which we've been handling the economy, and all of that. And this debt obviously has imposed, extreme hardships on the masses of our people and on all of us. Inflation, for example, has gone, through the roof, 50%, now about 40%. Standard of living is falling. The cost of living is going up. And so these are big questions that need to be looked at. This system of governance we are running, those who run the country, the political, elite, the bureaucracy, all of us, in a sense, who have responsibility. The question remains whether we have executed the trust that was reposed or that has been reposed in those who have responsibility. And it seems as if it's not the case. And I think that the IMF too, when you look at the press release, it's as if it's repeating the same issues that were raised in 1983 in a way that is almost laughable. There's something about the tools of running our economy that we are not even addressing at the fundamental level. And so long as we don't do that and we keep papering over these key fundamental questions, I think that we might yet be coming back to the same issues 20 years from now. And I think that is the pain and the anguish that one more or less is forced to feel when these things come up. Yes.
It's instructive that we're having this conversation on the Africa Day, where forebears wished that at this point we should be moving towards self-reliance, but unfortunately that's not the trajectory. I'm grateful to the director at the Center for Asian Studies, Dr. Lloyd Amwa, and also to you, Dr. Yao Graham of the Third World Network, for sharing your thoughts with us. That's it for Top Story. I am Blessed Sogah. Newsnight comes up shortly.